Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, comment, share, and subscribe to enjoy sneak previews of our videos, exclusive content, and more special programming in the works. Join our Patreon page, patreon.com/thought-to-action. You can even take part and check us out on our Ask Us Anything sessions where we answer your questions. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Getter, and the website londoncenter.org. Check out our Teespring store too. Plenty of merch there. Link in description. So, how is that green agenda going? Well, it sounds nice, and looking toward cleaner energy sources is a good idea. Pushing a not ready for prime time or big stage politically fueled policy to comply with the false utopia plans laid out in Agenda 2030 and the Great Reset has led to higher gasoline and other energy source prices, a subsequent mass inflation, especially in the realm of food, raw materials, and related supplies, warnings of rolling blackouts in some areas. While we need to find better sources of energy and there's a finite supply of fossil fuels so we can help future generations, is the current world energy agenda trying too hard, too fast? Are their hearts in the right place? Or are some trying to align their financial portfolios with these dreams? What are the current failures, and where do we need to look to solve our energy problems in real life? Our panel from the London Center for Policy Research is here to discuss it. We have London Center for Policy Research President Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, London Center Distinguished Fellow Navy Captain Pete O'Brien, and London Center Senior Fellow Jay Homnick. Well, a popular trend seems to be go green or buy an electric car, and you're a good person. We need to base energy needs and research for alternative sources into reality rather than political fantasy. Tony, you have an actual degree and background in environmental science. What has been the failure of the balance between finding cleaner sources of energy and making sure this and other nations' infrastructures are ready to make some changes?
Well, Chris, thanks for that point. Yeah, and I've got a degree from Wright State University, 1986. You can people can verify it for those who really want to delve down into it. And it's not about a failure of finding resources. It's the decision to politicize science and process of establishing paths to real resources, which has happened. And I'm wearing, as you see, this new Green Deal camouflage because it's all a camouflage. I raided Ted Nugent's wardrobe to find this and wear this today just for this broadcast. And the point being is that it's all a sham. There are real paths to real energy that is renewable, that would provide adequate and sustainable levels of resources to include an upward curve for additional resource needs. But the decision has been by the left to politicize everything relating to that. First off, they've taken this whole fiction of CO2 and used it as a tool to create fear that somehow, as Miss AOC, as Miss Ocasio-Cortez has said, we have, I think it was like 10 years to live or something. Little spoiler alert: the world's not ending in 10 years. But they've used
that was 2 years ago too, Tom.
Yeah, so we got like 8. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. It's like it's this fear mongering that the politicians on the left use to create conditions for the idea that, oh, you are the problem, and to help that problem, let us spend your money. And that comes to number 2, is this resource issue. Everything they talk about, their solutions, is always based on pricing carbon. Carbon is a plant food and is not a greenhouse gas that does anything significant. CO2 is essentially something that's required. Every time we breathe, we inhale nitrogen and oxygen, we exhale nitrogen and CO2 and carbon dioxide. Carbon monoxide is bad; it'll kill you. And carbon, there's other carbons out there which create real problems, but CO2 is not one of them. And so you've created this idea that we're just going to throw money at it. The whole climate accords was all about the West, funded by us, doing all these actions where if CO2 was actually an issue, the biggest pollutants on the planet are China and India, and they aren't interested in doing anything to curtail it. So, and nor am I'm not worried about their CO2. I'm worried about the particulate from burning coal, which is creating all sorts of unhealthy conditions, but that's a separate issue. So those are the things that I've seen that have come up. The path to answer your question directly, Chris, fossil fuel is still the answer. There's abundant resources for 100 years or more just within the United States through our internal resources, and that's something that we should use and develop as part of our economic strategy to make sure that the American people can grow, that our industry can grow using U.S. industry. Long term, one of the solutions, which has been bad mouthed and made into a boogeyman by the left, is nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is highly efficient, highly effective, renewable. And this is one of those things that the left has maligned for the wrong reasons. If you take all the nuclear waste, all the waste that has been created since the beginning of the civilian nuclear programs, since I guess it was the 1940s when they first started to use civilian, if you took every bit of that waste, it would only fill one football stadium. And we're talking about all these years. So it's not as wasteful as it's been made out to be. It's not as dangerous as people made it to be during 3 Mile Island. There's all these things, there's all these myths the left has used to, again, push Americans, push the world towards this green energy New Deal. And I always ask this when I do the lectures. Do you all know what the one element that's required for all green energy? Do you know what that one element is? Fossil fuel. You cannot do green without having some fossil fuel involved. If you do windmills, you have to have carbon and petroleum to make the plastics and to make the supports. If you're going to do basic solar panels, you got to have carbon to make the actual panels and that sort of thing to make it work. And by the way, it's not sustainable. All these things are dependent on wind or sun, which are not always available. So there's no realistic path to having these things replace any number of resources we now depend upon. And the reason the left continues to push it, especially the Biden administration, Biden themselves admitted this, is they want to control the whole thing. So it's not about benefit. It's not about realistic science. It's about how politicians on the left have recognized this fear complex, this guilt complex they've created can be used and harvested for purposes of their gaining political power. That's what it's all about, and that's where this is all going. And I'm sorry, I got a degree in this. I actually can speak as an expert. That's what's going on here. So.
But wait a minute. The ultimate expert in climate science and climate change and all of the energy in the entire world, Greta Thunberg, said there is no possible way that that nuclear energy would ever be considered green. I believe it goes like this: no amount of lobbyism and greenwashing will ever make nuclear green. So that pretty much sums up what the green people want. Maybe people just aren't making money off of nuclear energy in
They're not.
in that particular political
Well,
sector.
Chris, that's
Right.
the issue.
That's
is
true.
that once you do a nuclear plant, it sustains itself for a long time. The fuel, while not cheap, is actually very much a resource that's available. And once you refine it, once you get it in there, it lasts a long time. And this stuff isn't weapons grade stuff. This stuff cannot be turned into weapons if it's done correctly. And so the whole issue regarding nuclear has been subverted by the left because there's no money in it. Ultimately, it's expensive to begin with. It costs a lot of money. The certification process is a bear, but it's worth it. And these things will run a long time on a little fuel, and that's why they don't want to do it. So,
Pete, another one, something you brought up a little while back, was the failure of the food to ethanol.
oh boy,
oh my God! Here's
he is a corny guy, so I guess I can talk about this.
And think about this: right in the middle of a food shortage, right in the middle of high inflation, advocates are still pushing for this food to ethanol garbage. And I say garbage because that's what it turns gasoline into.
It's an important point here to remember that when you dilute gasoline with ethanol, your overall calorie output per unit volume per gallon is less. So you're going to get less miles per gallon. Luckily, though, if you put ethanol in a gas tank, except unless the car is made explicitly for carrying ethanol, it will in fact do things like reduce the lifetime of things like your gaskets and that kind of thing. So you got that going.
Yep.
But the issue here is if you really want to be nerdy about this, the issue is energy density. Gasoline has more energy. There's more energy density. There's more energy in a pound of gasoline than there is in a pound of alcohol. There's much more energy in a pound of gasoline than there is in a pound worth of the most effective battery on the planet. In fact, the best a battery can do is a little less, as I recall the numbers, is a little less than 1/2 of the energy density of gasoline. So if you have 100 pounds of gasoline in your car, you would need a 200-pound battery operating at peak efficiency in order to get the same amount of energy out of it. Of course, it doesn't actually work that way in practice. That's just in the laboratory. But the issue here is when you start looking at corn in particular. The United States is going to this year grow about 15 billion bushels of corn. That works out to, if I recall correctly, about 300 million tons of corn. 1/3 of that, 100 million tons, 5 billion bushels of corn, ballpark, is to make ethanol. To what end? Really, it's a net drain. It's a net drain on our overall energy output. Never mind the fact that you have to convert the corn into ethanol. The actual output on the road, moving cars down the road, it is slightly less efficient, but it makes the cars run out faster, or decay faster. So you got that going for you. But at the same time, we've got a whole bunch of people standing around right now this particular year worrying about food famine. And they're worried about it because they're worried about the 25 million tons of mainly wheat and some barley and I think a little bit of corn, some other grains that aren't getting out of Ukraine. Well, I want those grain to get out of Ukraine too. But at the same time, I wonder about the simple idea of what about those 100 million tons rather, of corn. Now, it's not the greatest corn in the world. It was designed to keep corn so that you could use it for making ethanol, but it could be turned into a low-grade cornmeal. And, for someone who's starving, tasteless cornmeal is probably better than starving. I'm just going to guess there. So we could easily address the problem. It's a no-risk issue of the global food shortage by simply turning and saying, take some of that corn over there that's being turned into ethanol, don't turn it into ethanol, turn it into cornmeal and feed some people. But more to the point here, since we're talking about energy, is this idea that somehow we're going to eliminate, as Tony just said, eliminate petroleum products and somehow keep producing. First off, the amount of petroleum products, diesel fuel for one, and not strictly petroleum products, but the petroleum industry, natural gas for the use in the making of fertilizers for two. These are huge issues. And the idea that somehow you're going to be able to make enough organically grown crops to feed the planet is laughable. It's not. It is not possible. If someone wants to pull out the numbers, put them on a blackboard, it is not possible. We're not going to go over the numbers here because it's boring doing math in public. But it does not work. You cannot do it, and the idea you can is ridiculous.
Well, I think that ethanol is our primary energy resource, by which I mean that it only exists because of the Iowa primary. And it's completely ridiculous that in the most civilized, wealthy country in the world, sophisticated, all the adjectives you want, we have this crazy blackmail situation We were forced to grow a crop and use it for a foolish purpose and undermine both our agriculture and our automobile system at the same time. Completely insane. But it's just one of those things that happens in the modern world. But that's one point. But I think also, I know I made this point before in a different way, but the fact is that the lies that are spread by the left about it to build up this green world that they've created with anti-nuclear at the same time as anti-gasoline and all of this stuff. But the level of the lies, and as the years go by, they become more entrenched. It becomes much more difficult to uproot it. And this is something we really have to strategize. How do you blow up this balloon? You know, it's a balloon. How do you put a pin in it and make the thing blow up in a way that people realize it's not only baloney, but it's dangerous baloney?
One of those dangerous fictions that has been perpetrated on us, and Tony mentioned it as well, is the issue of nuclear waste. Nuclear waste up until the Carter administration was all being processed, and nuclear waste is still processed. The French process their nuclear waste, and the result is they don't have a big stadium full of waste. They have a small building full of waste, and they have nearly as many reactors. I think I want to say what they have 60 reactors. We have 110 or something like that.
Right.
Their waste is,
and they're growing it, but they're growing it. They've decided as a nation they are investing more in nuclear. That's where they're going.
Yeah,
well, they're also playing on fears of the past. Like people are saying, well, we don't want another 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, but I don't.
So Chernobyl was a
Right.
flaw based on both design and politics. Their system created that. They the way they decided to build that was it was a design flaw that was designed to fail.
And in the United States, following 3 Mile Island, the United States nuclear power companies got together. They formed an institute, the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators.
Yeah.
That has been led since then. The folks sit in there for 8 years at a time. Has been led every time since then. Each of the leaders directors has been a retired Navy admiral with experience.
I was going to ask that question next, Pete. So how many years has the nuclear Navy been the nuclear Navy? How many years now?
You know, the USS Nautilus, 1954, 55, we have never had a nuclear incident. It's not because we're lucky. It's because there's hard process in place. It is well applied, and the designs keep improving. And
right.
The idea here that somehow you cannot process this fuel, that these systems are dangerous, they're not. I've spent a good deal of time on nuclear ships. I don't think I glow at night. And more to the point, the United States right now has a growing population and a growing need for electricity. If we're going to maintain the standard of living that we have right now and spread it out to everybody in the country who is going to be here by 2050, we need a 75% increase in our baseline electricity output.
Yep.
Now, there is no way you get there, no way you get there with solar power or solar panels or any of that nonsense. It's not going to happen. There is only one way to get there, and that is you need to build big power stations.
Yeah, and you're not going to get there if you think you're going to remove fossil fuel, coal and natural gas and other petroleum from the mix. But that's what they want to do. And again, just for everybody to understand who's watching this is what the Biden administration is. This is their policy. Their policy is, we don't care about the American people or what Pete just said. We don't care about what we know the needs to be. We're going to force you down a path of technology, which we know is not ready for prime time. It may not be ready for prime time for another 100 years, but we don't care.
Pierre Boulez wrote a novel called The Good Leviathan in 1977. And it was all about how this nuclear tanker, suddenly the water around the nuclear tanker people figured out it was miraculous. And they started, putting it in blind people's eyes and they could see. And he made a whole thing about it, which may be in a way poke fun at things, but it actually had the impact of, saying to the world, no, nuclear is good stuff. You guys are just throwing this thing out because of some, buzzwords. If you remember the 1970s, unfortunately, we're all old enough to remember that. In the 1970s, there was demonstrations going on everywhere. Britain, Germany, and in the middle of all that, somehow France, and I think his book actually helped. And they created they carved out this little alternate reality for themselves and said, what the heck, this stuff works. and amazingly, none of us have learned that lesson.
Well, but wait a minute. Wind turbines are going to save the world.
Yeah.
Wait, that's it. So forget nuclear. Wind turbines are going to save the world. I will venture. I will submit something that Tony brought up in a recent Ask Us Anything. And if you don't subscribe to us on Patreon, you may not have seen it yet, or you might have checked it out in our little clips we have. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the big red button if you would like to keep informed of what we're putting out there. Tony, you mentioned the eyesore known as the Elizabeth City Amazon project.
The Amazon Wind Project.
Yes, Amazon Wind Project. The one in Elizabeth City has become an eyesore and a symbol for the failures of wind turbines.
So, yeah, let's just go through a couple of technical points. The actual turbines themselves only operate in a very limited parameter of wind speed, 8 to 19 miles an hour. So unless the wind speed is in that sweet spot, it doesn't work. They either don't move fast enough or they're moving too fast. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the Obama administration and the Democrats who were in power at the time overpromised and underdelivered. Basically, they said, oh, this will be able to generate X, Y, Z. I don't want to go on with the numbers. People will forget them anyway. But suffice to say, that's an order of magnitude less than what they promised. And the costs have been astronomical. And of course, they want to do more. Oh, well, we got it all wrong. We lied to you, but we want to build more. And the federal government heavily subsidizes all this. It's not only impractical, this isn't sustainable without federal intervention constantly. If not for your taxpayer, my taxpayer dollars going into this, it could not exist. The economic model is not only flawed, it doesn't exist. There is no economic model. It does not exist in any way that could generate sufficient power to sustain or justify the costs. And yet, we're being told constantly, we must accept renewables which aren't renewable. Again, truth in advertising is all I'm asking for is truth in advertising. I'm sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, and people should go take a look at some of the wind farms in Europe that are being deconstructed as we speak, because they didn't deliver and they're too expensive to keep operating. I just want to add one little story about this idea of the eyesore. There was going to be a wind farm built up off of Massachusetts. They found the right spot. They found a spot that relatively low seas with a relatively steady wind, the ideal. And they put up a test pylon to get the data sampling for necessary winds. But what was the problem? The problem was on Horseshoe Shoal. Horseshoe Shoal is about 10, 12 miles due south of Hyannis, Massachusetts. So that it was visible, among other places, it was visible from the Kennedy estate and from the Kerry estate. And so what eventually happened when people said, well, we want to put these, they were going to put in, I want to say 40 or 50 large windmills on Horseshoe Shoal. The Kennedy family and the Kerry family harumphed, and the project was killed because it would be an eyesore. They actually said that it would disrupt the view from the beach. They didn't want it there, but they don't care if it's someplace else. In fact, they support it going someplace else. John Kerry, Mr. Green, wants to put in more giant offshore wind turbines, just not someplace where he can see it.
My friend Chris Plant calls him Old Bolt Neck. Just saying, but let me not divert the crowd from.
there's
Yeah,
also a noise pollution issue when it comes to these things as well. British Medical Journal did this and put out a study on this in 2012, saying a large body of evidence now exists to suggest that wind turbines disturb sleep and impair health at distances and external noise levels that are permitted in most jurisdictions. That is again a quote from the 2012, or that's from the British Medical Journal in 2012.
Yeah, but Chris, at least they kill eagles and condors.
There
at,
you
at
go.
least those
Well,
things are out of control. I can't believe we haven't found a way to kill them more efficiently than wind
Well,
turbines. I'm just shocked.
Speaking about conflict and how to manage it, I think it would be a great idea to take the noise limiting people and the fuel limiting people and put them in the same room and let them fight it out.
Well, I don't see why not. I think it's a good experiment.
Works for
Maybe
me.
we could ask Joe Biden to fund that with the new Green Deal money that he's got. Like $2 billion, $200 billion he just set aside for this. So that's a good purpose for that. But-
Here's another
yeah.
thing. By the way, on nuclear power, does anybody remember why the United States stopped processing its nuclear fuel? Did it have anything to do with security? I'm sorry, with pollution or toxic waste? No, none of those are the issues. The issue was, according to the Carter administration, which did this, was because of a fear that the nuclear waste would be lost and would be used by terrorists against us.
Insane. And the way it's processed, and I encourage people to go out there and look there, the way it's processed, it's not possible. It's actually like pretty much put into glass. They dilute it so much, then they layer it, and then they put it in the ground. It's like a terrorist would literally be better off going to refine raw uranium than trying to get it out of the stuff that they put in the ground to fade away. It's insane.
Well,
You
you bring it
didn't
up.
read you didn't read any Alistair McLean when you were younger?
Well, you bring this stuff up to Biden, he'll say, "Come on, man, tourists won't come and hurt us. Gas prices, Putin will do that stuff to nuclear stuff. Yeah, that's
Nuclear
it.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And ghost
So-
guns.
But I think we all recognize here, again, we're all about just trying to put the information out as it exists, not as people want it to be. And I'm sorry if this offends the soft feelings of the millennials regarding their being lied to for all these years, but nuclear energy and the remains of the process, those waste products are literally harmless. And the more we fight against this, the more we endanger the future that I'm sure they would like to have when they move out of their parents' basement, if that ever happens, just saying. So back on topic, though. Speaking, there are other things that relate to this directly that I don't think we pay enough attention to. For example, speaking of millennials, I'm talking to you right now on a computer that's made of aluminum and plastics. Those plastics came from petrochemicals. I'm drinking from a glass made of plastic. Pretty much, I'd say, looking around my office here, about 20 to 30% of everything that's here is made of plastic in some form. Our society is based on a sustained and stable access to petrochemicals. It's not just gas. It's actually everything we use, everything we touch on a daily basis, telephones. So the idea somehow that we're going to abandon this as a primary source of societal sustenance is beyond insane. And this is where the left never actually talks about the consequences of not understanding how things work. And the other thing on the opposite of this is no one's actually studied the effects of plastics on the human body over the period we've been using plastics as a primary provider of liquids and food to the human body. Or, if you drink water, when we're in the desert, we're drinking out of these bottles of water, hotter than hell. They've been cooking in the sun, and you don't know what.
They're about 150 degrees.
Yeah, I know. It's like we don't even know what does the plastic leach into the water? Does that have an effect? There are legitimate things that should be. Oh no, we don't want to. We're not worried about those things. But that's the things we should be looking at if we were serious about environmental issues, and we're not. We're just not. So
It always did amaze me that the supply guys always would leave those big pallets of water bottles in the brightest spot.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so bad on the water, but if you're a Coke drinker like me, oh my goodness,
Oh
you
boy.
take that Coke out of the sun, it is awful.
I
But
know. It rots your teeth too. Just saying.
Oh, you can take rust off your motor though, your car
Yeah.
motor with that. Oh my
The-
gosh.
But if I could just go back on one little point here, and then we go forward here. I would encourage everybody, if you haven't done this lately, go look at the numbers for baseline electricity production in the country, because baseline is the number that counts. Baseline is the thing that's always there 100% of the time. And because of maintenance and downtimes and errors, et cetera, if you have a baseline requirement of X, you actually should have about 1.2x as your baseline production capacity. So if the country needs, 1 trillion watts of power out, it should be able to produce 1.2 trillion watts as baseline power. That is, it just can keep grinding this out 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year. And what does that mean? You don't do it at night, no solar panels. You don't do it when there's no wind, no windmills. You have to do something that they'll do this and just keep doing this and doing this and doing this. And there's only a couple of energy systems that do that kind of thing. Hydroelectric is one.
Right.
Big gas turbines are another. Big coal-fired power plants are another. Nuclear power plants are another. That's
Nagging wives.
Oh boy. And don't forget the science. There we go.
But the other piece of it here is, and people talk about, they talk about, well, we're going to go to electric power, et cetera, looking at electric cars. Okay, you're not going to electric cars if you're talking about running a farm or driving products from the container port to the market. That will be done with diesel trucks. And if you think that somehow an electric truck is going to work, you need to go look at the hard numbers of what people have come up with. It doesn't.
Yeah.
The diesel truck is the core of the retail market of every market in the United States. At its base, you'll find a diesel truck at someplace in there.
And diesel locomotives taking the long haul,
Diesel
very heavy freight.
Oh boy.
Diesel
Diesel.
diesel powered tractors plowing those
Right.
fields.
Exactly.
And oh, by the way, when they plow those fields, after they plow the fields, they put down fertilizer, most of which is made out of natural gas.
Exactly.
And by the way,
even before you get to retail, plenty of the material from manufacture to warehousing has to be trucked.
right.
We could open up another can of worms. We'll have to do this for another thought to action on this, because you're going to overburden the power grid. And that's going to be another issue altogether, because that's
right.
not even protected. And if you want to hear some of our discussions about that, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Ambassador Hank Cooper has done an extensive research on this, and we have a series of interviews with him when it comes to protecting our national power grid.
Look, the only thing I want to say is, as someone who actually has a degree, you need to actually look at the science. Stop listening to politicians who don't have a degree, don't have an interest, and are simply out to manipulate individuals for purposes of their own political power and gain. That's it. There are issues that we should be looking at. The issues that are being presented by the left are not the issues we should be examining. And those which they do put out are politicized or manipulated to the point of where they're not recognizable. Hydro energy, nuclear energy, a path to eventually fusion energy, using sustainable pockets of natural gas, of coal, of oil is the path that is the most practical for us right now. And we have developed clean options for all of those. They pollute very little. And the idea that using food to augment our fuel is damaging and counterproductive, especially at a time when we're going to see real shortages of food. And it's not here yet. I heard President Biden say yesterday about, oh, this is Putin's. It's like, no, we haven't seen Putin's price hikes. We haven't seen it. It's not. It's something. The flash to bang is like a year. It's going to take a year for all this stuff to show up, because all this grain, all these resources which are trapped in Ukraine, the effects of those not being on the market is not going to, it's not now. It's about 6 months from now. It's going to be starting to feel, it's going to follow through in that. And the idea that all of a sudden we're still going to decide, oh, we're still going to take our corn and make it into to phony baloney gas is insane, and something we have to relook, because it's not going to be sustainable, especially if we can help other elements of the people of the world with food. We need to rethink this immediately. So we just have to understand what the reality is we face, rather than allow the left's projection to be that which rules our actions.
Thank you for being with us for this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. Please remember to hit that like button. Feel free to comment on our discussion. We appreciate your thoughts. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Thought to Action, our channel on either Rumble or YouTube, or perhaps you want to subscribe to us on our audio outlets. Find out more about the London Center on our website, londoncenter.org. If you'd like to help us continue to create discussions and programming like this, please join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thought-to-action. You can enjoy sneak previews, special exclusive content, and our Ask Us Anything sessions. Also, pick up some merch at our Thought to Action Teespring store. The description is in the link is in the description below. Boy, oh boy, I have to make sure I get that together. For our panel at the Herb London Center for Policy Research, I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you, stay informed, and make your day a great one.
And thanks, Ted.